For a man who had dedicated 22 years of his life to the unyielding letter of the law, the sound of criminals laughing at him had become his new, brutal morning alarm. It was a symphony of derision, a chorus of mockery that ricocheted off the cold, unforgiving steel and sweat-stained concrete of his cell. Every day at dawn, it began. Officer James Miller, badge number 734, wasn't a guardian of order anymore. He was a ghost haunting his own prison, an apparition in a uniform he could still feel on his skin. He had been reduced to a number, just another forgotten soul in a cell block he used to command with an iron will. The inmates, men he once managed with a firm but demonstrably fair hand, now treated him like a game. He was a broken toy they could kick and prod for their own amusement. Their taunts were as sharp as a shiv, crude and designed to wound, but the real poison, the deep-acting venom that was truly and systematically killing him, came from a far more insidious source. The people who had orchestrated his downfall, who had meticulously engineered his descent into this personal hell, weren't the men behind bars with him. They were the ones still wearing the same starched blue uniform he used to. The one that was now folded up in a sterile, numbered evidence locker, a sacred relic from a life that felt like it belonged to a different man in a different lifetime. Betrayal is a silent predator. It doesn't announce its arrival with a roar. It doesn't give you the courtesy of a warning. It is a sudden, profound vacuum, a silence so complete that it deafens you, leaving you utterly alone in a suffocating darkness. All you have for company are the ghostly whispers of the man you used to be, a constant, tormenting reminder of a world that has been stolen from you. My name is James Miller. For 2 decades and 2 years, Blackwood Penitentiary wasn't just my place of employment, it was my entire world. It was a sprawling, brutal ecosystem of perpetual shadow and fleeting light, a city of caged men that I navigated with a strict, unwavering code of honor that had been passed down from my own father, a cop for 30 years. I believed in the unshakable existence of a hard, clear line between right and wrong, and I walked that line every single day without apology or compromise. The inmates knew I was firm, that the rule-book was my Bible, and I didn't bend its scripture for anyone, regardless of their reputation or affiliation. But they also knew I was fair. In a place like Blackwood, respect is a fragile and volatile currency, more valuable and harder to hold on to than any contraband weapon. I'd earned it, ounce by precious ounce, through years of consistent, predictable, and impartial conduct. They knew I wouldn't lie to them. They knew my word was my bond. I remember a summer years ago, when the yard was a tinderbox of tension. The Aryan Brotherhood and the Latin Kings were on the verge of a full-scale war over a perceived slight in the mess hall. The air was thick with the promise of bloodshed. The entire yard was on lockdown, guards in full riot gear lining the perimeter. I walked out into that dead silent space between 100 heavily armed convicts, my only equipment a radio and the reputation I had built. I spoke to the leaders, not with threats, but with logic and an understanding of their own codes. I brokered a truce with nothing more than a few quiet, direct words and a steady, unflinching gaze that told them I saw them not as animals, but as men who had to live in this world we shared. I was proud of that moment, proud of the officer I was. But that pride, as I learned in the cruelest way imaginable, was the perfect handle for my enemies to grab onto, to twist until everything I had built shattered into pieces. It all changed the day the new warden showed up, a day that began with a false, media-friendly sunrise. Warden Hemlock arrived not with a vision for Blackwood, but with a blueprint for his own career. He carried a politician's practiced, empty smile and possessed a venomous ambition coiled tightly behind his calculating eyes. He spoke in focus-grouped buzzwords, talking a big game about modernization, rehabilitative synergy, and data-driven efficiency, but all he really saw when he looked at Blackwood's aging walls was a stepping stone. This was his ticket to a bigger, more prestigious appointment in state government. He didn't see the prison as a place for consequence or a crucible for rehabilitation. He saw it as his own personal kingdom, a fiefdom to be leveraged for his own political advancement. His reign of institutional decay started with small, sneaky changes, termites eating at the foundation of the prison's order. Certain inmate groups, specifically the most violent and disruptive ones like the Serpent Crew, suddenly started getting inexplicable privileges. They were assigned the best work details, received extra recreation time, and had blind eyes turned to their illicit trafficking activities. In return, they became Hemlock's unofficial enforcers, keeping the other inmates terrified and in line, creating an artificial, brittle peace that looked spectacular on his weekly reports. The statistics were beautiful. The reality was ugly. Simultaneously, a purge of the old guard began. Veteran officers I'd trusted for decades, men who shared my code and bled for this institution, were systematically shuffled off to dead-end posts in the laundry or the lonely watchtowers. They were subjected to grueling shift changes and nitpicking internal reviews, all designed to encourage them into early retirement. Then, 2 guards, Davies and Thorne, the slimiest, most opportunistic suck-ups you've ever seen, were promoted to senior command positions they hadn't come close to earning. Davies was a compulsive gambler, always looking for an angle, and Thorne was a weak-willed bootlicker who craved authority he couldn't earn. They became the Warden's personal spies, his palace guard, strutting through the cell blocks with an unearned arrogance that set everyone's teeth on edge. I watched it all happen, a cold knot of dread tightening in my gut. I knew he wasn't just managing a prison. He was playing a dangerous, corrosive game, trading the soul of the institution for a few positive statistics he could tout to the media. The inmates, masters of sensing shifts in the political winds, felt the power change immediately. Prisoners are experts at sniffing out weakness, and suddenly the administration was reeking of it. The foundation of respect I'd helped build over 2 decades was crumbling, being replaced by a foundation of fear and favoritism. The mockery started small, like a dripping tap in the dark. An inmate from the Serpent Crew, one of Hemlock's pet gangs, would accidentally spill a food tray near my feet in the mess hall, and a whole table of his cronies would erupt in calculated, performative laughter. Whispers and snide remarks would trail me down the cell block like a foul odor, insidious rumors I could never quite pin down but could always feel at my back. They called me Old Man Miller, the last dinosaur, mocking my adherence to the rules that no longer seemed to apply. I wasn't blind. I started documenting everything. In a small, black moleskine notebook I kept in my breast pocket, I logged every rule Hemlock's new regime bent, every favor Davies and Thorne granted to the Serpents. The extra food shipments to their block, the broken camera in the corridor where they ran their card games, the way disciplinary reports against them mysteriously vanished from the system. I was building a case, brick by painstaking brick. But they weren't blind either. The real turning point, the moment the crosshairs settled directly over my heart, was when Davies and Thorne realized I was watching. They knew I saw what they were doing. I made a critical error in a brief, tense confrontation in the Sallyport. "Enjoying your new friends?" I'd asked Thorne, nodding toward a Serpent leader who was openly smoking a cigarette in a non-smoking area. Thorne's face paled, and Davies stepped in, his voice a low growl. "You should mind your own business, Miller. Times are changing." I saw in their eyes that I wasn't just an obstacle anymore. I was a threat. They knew I was documenting their every corrupt move. They needed to get rid of the last piece of the old guard who wouldn't bend, the one man who represented an existential threat to their entire parasitic enterprise. They needed to get rid of me. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was coming off a brutal, soul-crushing double shift, the kind that leaves your bones aching and your mind frayed. My boots felt like lead weights. As I walked toward the main gate, dreaming only of my quiet apartment and a hot shower, a team from Internal Affairs met me. They were led by a man I'd never seen before, polite but with eyes as cold and empty as a morgue slab. It was all theatrical, a well-rehearsed play for an audience of one. They announced they had an anonymous tip and needed to search my personal effects. They tossed my locker, a dramatic display of official procedure. They pulled out my spare uniform, my family photos, my worn copy of Meditations. And there, tucked deep inside the toe of my spare boot, they found a package. A shrink-wrapped burner phone and a significant quantity of high-grade contraband destined for the blocks. I was floored, a wave of cold nausea washing over me. It was such a blatant, amateurish setup, but they performed their roles with grim, unshakable professionalism. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Davies in the background, poorly attempting to hide a triumphant smirk. Thorne, ever the coward, just looked away, feigning shock and profound disappointment. The evidence was presented to the ranking captain on duty as irrefutable. The fix was in. Just like that, in less than an hour, I was suspended, stripped of my badge and sidearm, and walked off the grounds of the prison that had been my second home for more than 2 decades. But they didn't send me home to await my hearing. No, that would have been too simple, and it would have left me free to talk. Warden Hemlock, in a move of pure, calculated evil, declared that as a senior officer who knew the prison's every layout, every procedure, every systemic vulnerability, I was a Level 1 security risk to the institution. So they put me in administrative segregation, a prison inside the prison. A solitary cell in a long-forgotten, unused wing, a place caked in a century of dust and despair, reserved for dirty cops and high-risk informants awaiting trial. That's where the real nightmare began. The inmates in the next block over, separated by only a single resonant wall, knew I was there within hours. The word spread like fire in dry grass. They got Miller. The old-school bull is in the hole. They screamed my name, day and night, their voices echoing in the desolate, tomb-like wing. They taunted me relentlessly, a 24-hour psychological assault. They described in graphic, stomach-turning detail what the gangs do to a dirty cop on the inside. They knew my routines, my schedule, my very existence was their entertainment. The psychological warfare was non-stop, a constant, crushing barrage designed to shatter a man's sanity. And my former colleagues, the guys I would have taken a bullet for without a second thought, they were the worst part. They were the ones who delivered the most painful blows. They would slide my food tray through the slot in the door with cold, dead eyes, refusing to meet my gaze, refusing to even acknowledge my existence. To them, I was already one of the convicts. A pariah. I was no longer one of them. I saw Mark, a man whose son's medical bills I'd helped pay, look right through me as if I were a pane of glass. The message was clear. I was alone, framed, and being systematically eaten alive by the very system I'd sworn my life to uphold. Days melted into weeks, then months. The constant noise, the suffocating isolation, the crushing, physical weight of utter hopelessness. It's a process that has been scientifically designed to break a man, to strip him of his identity, his history, and his will to live. And it almost did. For a while, I gave in to the black tide of despair. I let the darkness consume me, replaying my betrayal over and over, the hot anger and the cold futility eating me from the inside out. I stopped eating. I paced the cell until my feet were raw. I was becoming the ghost they wanted me to be. But then, after what felt like an eternity adrift in that black ocean, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a snap of rage. It was the total opposite. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying clarity. I was staring at my own hollowed-out face in the tiny, scratched steel mirror bolted to the wall. My eyes were sunken and lifeless, the eyes of a man already dead. The taunts from the next block, which had been my constant, tormenting soundtrack, just faded into meaningless background static. In that single silent moment, the white-hot anger at my betrayal and the cold, heavy despair of my situation fused together. They were compressed by the immense pressure of my confinement and hardened into something else entirely. Something cold, sharp, and intensely focused, a singular, diamond-hard purpose. They thought they had broken me. They saw a disgraced officer, a ghost in a cell, waiting to fade away into nothing. What they didn't see was a strategist who'd just been given the one thing he never had on the outside, all the time in the world to think. They had locked me in a library of my own memories, and I was about to read every single volume. From that day forward, I became the perfect picture of a defeated man. I shuffled when I walked during my 1 hour of solo rec time in a concrete cage the size of a dog run. I never made eye contact with the guards. I let my body waste away, picking at my food, creating the perfect, convincing illusion of a man who had completely and utterly given up. Davies and Thorne would stroll by my cell every now and then, a twisted pilgrimage to gloat at their handiwork. They would peer in with smug, undisguised satisfaction, their voices dripping with false pity. "Hang in there, Miller," Davies would say with a wink. They saw exactly what they wanted to see, a problem that had solved itself. It never crossed their minds that I was listening to every word they said, dissecting their insecure boasts, watching their every move, analyzing their patterns. It never occurred to them that I was no longer a prisoner. I was a hunter, and I was forging my own weapons in the dark. My mind, once filled with the mundane details of guard schedules and security drills, transformed into a war room. I'd spent 2 decades learning every inch of Blackwood. I didn't just know the official blueprints. I knew its hidden life, its secret circulatory system. I knew which maintenance vents in the old administrative wing, if you listened at just the right time on a windy day, carried voices directly from the warden's private office. I knew about the 30-second camera blind spot in the corridor behind the laundry, a glitch from an upgrade in '09 that was never properly fixed. I knew about the old, sealed-off service tunnels from when the prison was first built a century ago, a detail I'd found in an archived engineering file while researching a new security protocol years ago. But most importantly, I knew the people. I knew the simmering rivalries between the gangs, the explosive mix of pride and paranoia that governed their world. I knew the gnawing greed that drove men like Davies, a gambling addict always one bad bet away from ruin. I knew the sloppy, grasping ambition of Thorne. And I knew that Warden Hemlock's biggest weakness was his pathological, all-consuming obsession with his public image. My plan started to take shape, a spider's web of psychological warfare designed not just to expose them, but to make them dismantle themselves. I had one monitored, 15-minute phone call a week with my sister, Sarah. We had always been close, and she knew without a doubt that I was innocent. During one call, we worked out a simple, unbreakable code based on our childhood memories. I'd ask her about Aunt Carol's medical bills, and she'd know that was the signal to call the one person I could trust on the outside, a retired bulldog of a detective named Frank Fitzpatrick. Fitz was old school, hated corruption with a fiery passion, and had no love for political climbers like Hemlock. More importantly, he owed me a big favor from an old, off-the-books case. He became my hand in the outside world. Next, I went to work on the inside. The inmate who delivered my meals, a lifer named Sal who'd been inside for 30 years, was from an old-school crew that despised the new, reckless gangs the warden was secretly empowering. Sal was quiet, observant, and commanded a deep, understated respect from his own people. I started talking to him, just a few words through the food slot each day. I didn't make deals or promises. I simply gave him information, planting seeds of calculated doubt. Funny how the Serpent crew is getting all the good workshop assignments, isn't it? Almost like they have a direct line to the top, I'd murmur. I fed him a piece of bait, a fake tip about a large contraband drop happening in a rival gang's territory. When the drop didn't happen, Sal's rivals, whom he had warned, got busted by guards for being on high alert and acting suspiciously, which only made Sal's intel seem more valuable. Sal started to trust me. I was feeding him just enough verifiable truth to make my bigger, more strategic lies stick. With Fitz on the outside and Sal on the inside, my web started to come together. I had Fitz anonymously tip off Davies's off-track bookie that Davies, who was deeply in debt, was about to score big and was planning to skip town without paying. The bookie squeezed him, tightening the financial noose and making him desperate. Simultaneously, I had Sal spread a subtle but potent rumor through the prison grapevine. Thorne was being personally groomed by Hemlock for a promotion to captain, and part of the deal was cutting the unreliable Davies out of the lucrative side deals with the Warden. Suddenly, my two corrupt guards weren't friends anymore. They were enemies, watching each other with suspicion, their paranoia growing by the day. They were my first two dominoes, perfectly aligned and ready to fall. All I needed now was a stage to push them on. And I knew the perfect one was just weeks away, the governor's annual prison inspection, an event that always came with a busload of reporters. Warden Hemlock would be puffing out his chest for the cameras, desperate to show off his model prison. His pride, I knew, would be his downfall. The day of the tour arrived, and a weird artificial calm fell over Blackwood. The floors were polished to a mirror shine, and even the air seemed to have been scrubbed clean of its usual despair. Warden Hemlock, looking sharp and supremely confident in a tailored suit, was leading the governor's delegation and a pack of journalists through the main halls. This was his big moment, the culmination of his efforts to present a sanitized, successful, and thoroughly fictional image to the world. It was also my moment to burn his entire world to the ground. At exactly 11 a.m., just as the tour group walked into the main commons area for a staged demonstration of inmate vocational programs, my plan kicked off. On the east side of the yard, a riot exploded. It was a carefully staged and contained brawl between two gangs, both of whom Sal and I had meticulously wound up for weeks. I'd fed them the exact same lie through different trusted channels, that the other gang was planning a massive, coordinated attack during the inspection to seize control of the yard. Both sides, already paranoid and itching for a fight, took the bait completely. It was controlled chaos, a piece of violent theater perfectly choreographed to pull every available security officer to one spot and make the administration look hopelessly incompetent and overwhelmed. As alarms screamed and guards scrambled in confusion, Warden Hemlock's face went white. His perfectly curated tour was dissolving into chaos right in front of the governor and the flashing cameras of the media. In the control room, Davies and Thorne were panicking, barking contradictory orders into their radios, their fragile alliance now completely shattered by mutual suspicion. And that's when the second domino fell. Davies, utterly convinced that Thorne and Hemlock were setting him up to take the fall for the riot, made a desperate, panicked call on a burner phone, a phone I'd made sure Sal had found and given to him a week earlier, telling him it was clean. He called his bookie, his voice a frantic whisper. "It's all going south. Hemlock and Thorne are setting me up. I need to get out now. I'm calling in the marker." He had no idea that my man Fitz had already tipped off state police investigators about that exact phone number, framing it as a lead in a larger prison corruption case. They weren't just listening. They were recording every single self-incriminating word. While guards were scrambling and the governor's security detail was rushing the delegation toward safety, the grand finale began. A young, hungry reporter I'd researched, Jenna Vance, known for her tenacity and willingness to challenge authority, received a text from an anonymous source. The text simply contained a locker number in the staff room and a 4-digit code. Inside, she found a small, unmarked USB drive, planted there by a cleaning crew contact of Fitz's just an hour earlier. Intrigued, she plugged it into her laptop. There was just one audio file on it, labeled Insurance. As Warden Hemlock tried to do frantic damage control, assuring the governor that the riot was just an isolated incident that was already under control, Jenna Vance stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Warden Hemlock," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with piercing clarity. "Is this you?" She pressed play. The audio was from a tiny digital recorder I used to carry for taking notes, a recording I had made months before I was framed. It was a conversation where the warden, feeling untouchable in the privacy of his own office, laid out his entire plan to frame me to Thorne, explicitly naming Davies as the one who would plant the evidence. "Miller is a dinosaur," the warden's arrogant, self-assured voice boomed from the phone speaker, echoing through the now silent hall. "He represents the old way, and he refuses to get in line. He has to go. We'll make it look like he's in bed with the gangs. Davies will handle the package. By the time Miller figures out what happened, he'll be on the other side of the bars." Dead silence. The only sound was the warden's own voice, a ghost from the past, damning him in the present. He froze. His face, which had been a mask of phony political charm, just crumbled. It was a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. He stared at the reporter's phone as if it were a viper poised to strike. He opened his mouth, a faint, fish-like gasp escaping, but no words came out. He was completely, utterly exposed, his entire kingdom of lies torn down in a single, perfect, irrevocable moment, broadcast live for the world to witness. The state troopers, who were already on site because of the riot, slowly turned their attention from the inmates to the warden. It was over. Walking out of Blackwood Penitentiary a free man was a surreal, disjointed experience. The sky seemed impossibly vast and impossibly blue. The iron gates that had been my tomb for 6 agonizing months now slid open to reveal not just a street, but my future. My name was cleared. The system, in its lumbering, awkward way, had corrected itself. Officer Miller, the respected guardian, was back. But the man who walked out into the warm sunlight wasn't the same man who'd been dragged in, broken and betrayed. The news reports told the rest of the story in the weeks that followed. Warden Hemlock, Davies, and Thorne were all indicted on a long and satisfying slew of charges, from conspiracy and tampering with evidence to racketeering and full-blown public corruption. The investigation they triggered was like a wildfire, burning through Blackwood's administration and exposing the deep, pervasive rot that Hemlock had cultivated. It was a complete and total house-cleaning, a cauterizing of a festering wound. I never wanted bloody revenge. That would have been too easy, too simple for the crime they committed against me. My vengeance was a chess game, played on a board of my own design. I used their own greed, their own corruption, their own character flaws against them, patiently and methodically. I didn't just want them punished. I wanted them to tear each other apart, to feel the specific terror of their world collapsing from the inside out, just as they had made me feel. Justice was served, but the scars from that kind of betrayal don't just disappear with a verdict. I got my dignity back, and I got my name back, but I learned a hard, bitter lesson in that dark cell. When you are forced to fight monsters, you have to risk entering their darkness. The line between right and wrong, once so clear and solid to me, now seemed fragile, blurred, and hopelessly gray. I was free, But I would never again be the same man who believed so completely, so naively, in the inherent goodness of the system he served.